Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. This video is all about your data collection methods. So in week 1, you're being asked to identify the data collection methods for your alpha test. And I know that there's a lot of content to review and information to consider when attempting to determine the most appropriate data collection methods for your alpha test. So, being that I understand how much you have to do, yet how very critical this first step of your alpha test is, I wanted to take a moment to go through some of the resources and explain them in a way that I think might help you more easily identify data collection methods that will be most beneficial for your alpha test. So the first resource we're going to look at is the textbook for the course. You've been asked to read chapters 1 through 5 this week, and while the content in chapters 1 through 4 is actually really interesting and it provides a lot of great detail on the overall process of usability testing, I wanted to take a moment during this video to look more closely at chapter 5, as that's where you start to see some of the factors that will help you get started with identifying your data collection methods. So there's a lot of really great information at the beginning of chapter 5, and I definitely recommend you read this, but I want to skip forward and look at the parts of the alpha test plan. And before you select any methods, any data collection methods, you want to first get clear on exactly what you hope to gain from your alpha test. And there are some great question prompts here if we scroll down to get you thinking about what information you need relevant to your prototype, as opposed to some more generic, less effective questions. So let's scroll down and take a look at communicating research questions. So it's likely that you may have more than one research question, and the textbook offers you some examples of some poorly worded, unfocused research questions, as well as some really specific, effective research questions. So these examples of research questions based on different products you can see indicated on the left-hand side. There are also some general research questions. These serve as a really wonderful guide for you all, whether you find a question that happens to fit perfectly, or more likely, if you use one of these examples as a guide to help identify research questions that will elicit the information you hope to obtain about your prototype. And keep in mind that the type of research question, the phrasing of your research question, is going to determine what type of data you need, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, which I'll talk about in a second, and therefore what data collection methods you need. Now, if we scroll down, we'll see that there is some information on selecting participants, but in this class, you'll be limited to your classmates, and we'll talk more about that next week. Now, looking at the method, we're going to take a look at the different design methods. So when you're describing your design methods and your data collection methods, really quick, a good rule of thumb when it comes to writing these, which is what you'll be completing within your template for week 1, is that you want to provide enough detail so that someone reading your work would be able to replicate an identical alpha test in the exact same fashion. So with this in mind, you'll want your description to be orderly, sequential, clear, and as succinct as possible while still providing enough details for someone to replicate your test. So let's talk about some of the different research designs. Before we do that though, I did want to let you know that you'll want to state your alpha test design along with your data collection methods. So that's why we're talking about the design here. As you work on your alpha test throughout the class, you're going to have some constraints with respect to the number of test users, the time to conduct your tests, the budget constraints, which are probably zero, no budget, and possibly the platform on which you've housed your prototype. And this is perfectly fine because there are most often or almost always constraints in real-world scenarios too, and we have to learn how to navigate those while still conducting effective alpha tests. So as I walk through these, I will point out that some of these methods won't or some of these design methods won't necessarily fit within the constraints of the class, but it is also really important that you read through them and understand them so that later on in a real world situation, you'd be well informed on each of these designs and able to select the most appropriate method in that particular scenario. So within this first design, independent groups design or between subjects design, essentially what you're doing is assigning each participant to a different component of your prototype. For example, you see that Terry has been assigned to this component of the prototype, but you don't see that participant's name appear in any of the other sections, and the same for Dana. Being that you only have 2 test users in this class, it may not be the most effective method. I suspect more of you will be opting for the within subjects design. In this design, the users test all aspects of the prototype, and it's most likely, again, the design that you'd utilize for your alpha test in this class. If you scroll down, you can see that there's a variation of this design in which you might ask participants to review the modules in different sequences. However, bear in mind that this might not be effective if you've developed, for example, a lesson that has sequential learning in which the participant would need content or knowledge or skills from module 1 to complete subsequent modules in your prototype. Scrolling down, we also see we have a testing multiple product versions. With this design method, you would essentially be comparing 2 different versions of a prototype. And again, I suspect that this wouldn't work for you because you probably only have 1 version of your prototype. And then we have a testing multiple group users design. And as you can see in the text for this design, you would be looking to gain information from different user groups. Again, though, your participants are going to be your classmates. So now I want to navigate back to the class so we can review some of the other resources within the instructor guidance for this week. So I'm going to click on the modules, scroll down to the week 1 instructor guidance. And this is all excellent information. I'm definitely not recommending that you skip over it. I just wanted to scroll down to some of the resources I wanted to talk about a little bit more specifically. And the first one being the UX research cheat sheet. So as we look at this resource and scroll down here past the introduction information, we see that we have an infographic that identifies various methods and activities as it relates to the different phases of product development. So keep in mind, though, that being that you all have a prototype already developed at this point, you've probably passed the discover and explore stage and would be looking more at the test and listen stages of development. And previously, when we were looking at the textbook, we were looking at identifying the design strategy of your research. And here you're starting to see some examples of data collection methods. So we can see benchmark testing, surveys, Q&A. And if you scroll down, you'll see some data collection methods, kind of scroll down here to the end, some data collection methods indicated. And if you scroll down further, you'll find even more information on some of those, particularly if we scroll down to the test and the listen sections. So again, you see those surveys, things of that nature. Now, keep in mind that you'll want to further explore exactly what those data collection methods are before you commit to any of them. So, for example, one of the methods you might have seen as I scrolled past was the questionnaire or a survey. So, these might be terms that you're familiar with, but there are likely some other terms that you're not necessarily familiar with. Definitely don't be shy about doing a bit of investigative work and clicking on some of the links to learn a bit more, as well as searching elsewhere online to find a little bit more information about those. So now I wanted to go back and look at one of the other resources, which is when to use user experience research methods. And along with your research questions, I think that this source is particularly helpful with identifying what type of data collection you might want to use, exploring attitudinal versus behavior, qualitative versus quantitative. And I definitely recommend reading through this resource, but I wanted to focus specifically on one of the infographics offered to help guide you with your research methods. Scroll a little faster there. So when you think back about those research questions that you landed on, were you asking why and how, or were you asking how many and how much? If your research questions asked how or why, you're going to want to select a qualitative research method. So with qualitative methods, you're looking for your testers' impressions, their opinions, and their perspective. So think about words. Some examples of qualitative data collection might be an interview with participants, a survey with open-ended question prompts, so it's important that you focus on open-ended questions with that survey, or possibly a narrated observation, such as moderated remote usability study. That's something that I mentioned in the body of the announcement, and you can read a little bit more about that and some tools related to that. Conversely, if your research questions you identified ask how many or how much, you're going to want to select a quantitative research method. With quantitative methods, you're looking for numbers and statistics. You could use a survey here, but keep in mind that it's all in how you create the survey, whether it serves as a qualitative or quantitative tool. Open-ended questions are going to yield qualitative results, while closed-ended questions yield quantitative results. So other examples of quantitative research methods might include questionnaires such as Likert scales or data analytics from your site. For example, if you have your prototype housed in a site that offers data analytics, you can incorporate that in your alpha test. For example, you might use those data analytics to determine how many users in the alpha test access a specific area of your product. So if you scroll down, you can see some of these different research methods discussed a bit further. Just have to scroll down a little bit. There we go. And however, as we look at these, just like with some of the designs we looked at in the textbook, we talked about how some of those design methods might not be feasible within this class, and the same holds true for your data collection methods. So keep in mind that your alpha test is going to be completed by 2 of your classmates within the course of 1 week. So you need to balance creating an alpha test that is going to yield meaningful, insightful information about your prototype, yet not too cumbersome or infeasible for your classmate to complete within that required time frame. So for example, a focus group, while a great data collection method, this one might not be ideal given that, number one, you only have 2 participants testing your prototype, and it might be a little bit different to coordinate that. An interview might be something you're interested in, especially if you have identified qualitative research questions. This might be something that you consider. And just keep in mind, though, that a lot of you may be on different time zones and scheduling may be difficult. So as we talk about soliciting participants next week, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about how to consider some of these factors. Eye tracking is a really cool tool and would be an example of a method you probably won't have access to because the software would be incredibly expensive. And another one I wanted to mention is moderated remote usability studies. So I mentioned this in the body of the announcement, but a really wonderful tool for this approach might be Screencast-O-Matic, and I provided a link to that as well. I think we have some other ones. Email surveys, this might be a good option, especially with the accessibility of SurveyMonkey. and the flexibility of the participant to respond to their answers. But as we conclude this video, I just wanted to offer a final reminder to make sure that you are aligning your data collection methods with the research questions you want to answer.